Did you know that Yahweh, the God of the Bible, wasn't always the only God? What if I told you he fought a divine war to rise above the other gods? How did he become the one true God we worship today? Today, we're unveiling one of the Bible's most fascinating mysteries, Yahweh's journey from being one God among many to the sole ruler of the universe. This divine war shaped the very foundation of our faith. In this video, we'll explore ancient texts, biblical passages, and key moments in Israel's history that reveal how Yahweh triumphed over other gods to establish himself as the only true God. Stay with us as we uncover the theological battles that influenced our understanding of God today. 1. The ancient spiritual landscape. The ancient Middle East was a land where gods were many. From the Canaanites to the Egyptians, people lived in a world filled with pantheons of gods, each with their own distinct roles and territories. For the Israelites, Yahweh was initially not alone. In fact, there were numerous gods in the spiritual landscape, with each nation worshipping its own set of deities. The Bible itself hints at this reality, especially in passages like Deuteronomy 32:8-9, which speaks of a time when the Most High divided the nations among the sons of God, but chose Israel for himself. Yahweh was not yet the sole deity of the earth. He was simply the God of Israel in a world full of divine rivals. At this time, Yahweh's supremacy was not fully realized. In the early days, Israelites did not reject the existence of other gods outright, but rather practiced monolatry, the worship of Yahweh alone, while acknowledging the existence of other deities. This is evident in Psalm 82, where the Elohim of gods are summoned to account for their failure to deliver justice, and Yahweh stands as the judge over them. This passage paints a vivid picture of a divine assembly, where Yahweh is just one among many gods, albeit the one who would soon assert his dominance. This period is crucial for understanding the development of monotheism. It shows us that Yahweh's reign wasn't automatically a given. The process of establishing Yahweh as the only true God was gradual and involved conflict with other gods who were once revered by Israel's neighbors, and at times, even by the Israelites themselves. It forces us to reflect on the evolution of faith, a time when Yahweh was a God among many, gradually becoming the one true God as the Israelites' understanding deepened. As Christians, we can take this historical perspective to examine our own spiritual journeys. When we start in faith, we may only partially understand God or have competing influences in our lives. Just as the Israelites once struggled with the idea of exclusive worship, we too may find ourselves wrestling with distractions or idols, whether material possessions, social status, or even our own desires. Understanding Yahweh's rise from a God among many to the singular authority over all helps us recognize the importance of dedicating our hearts fully to him, not divided by other influences or distractions. How does this journey from polytheism to monotheism reflect the transformation that happens in our own faith? How can we ensure that Yahweh reigns supreme in our hearts, just as he triumphed in ancient Israel? 2. The battle for supremacy. One of the most dramatic and defining moments in Israel's spiritual history takes place on Mount Carmel, where Yahweh faced off against the prophets of Baal. This wasn't just a battle of power, it was a battle for identity, loyalty, and supremacy. In 1 Kings 18:20-40, we see Elijah standing alone against 450 prophets of Baal, challenging them to call down fire from heaven to consume their sacrifices. The challenge wasn't merely for show, it was an intense spiritual war. If Baal was the true God, he would answer with fire. But when it was Yahweh's turn, the fire that descended consumed not just the sacrifice, but also the water surrounding it, an undeniable act of divine power. Elijah's confrontation with the prophets of Baal was not only about a display of raw power, it was about declaring Yahweh as the true God and the only one worthy of worship. This event symbolized the moment when Israel had to make a choice: follow the God who had given them their identity, or turn to other gods like Baal, who seem more powerful in certain worldly areas, such as fertility and harvests. The fire from heaven was not just a miraculous event, it was Yahweh's spiritual assertion of supremacy. He wasn't just one God among many, he was the only one who could answer with power. The confrontation on Mount Carmel is a stark reminder of the gods we face in our own lives. We might not have physical altars to Baal, but we are constantly confronted with idols and distractions that demand our attention. Whether it's the pursuit of success, relationships, or possessions, these gods compete for our hearts and loyalty. But just like the challenge on Mount Carmel, we are faced with the question, who will we choose to serve? Are we devoted to Yahweh, the one true God, or do we allow other influences to take precedence? This moment in Israel's history isn't just a story about a contest between gods. It's an invitation for us to examine our own hearts. In a world full of distractions and temptations, do we recognize Yahweh as the one true source of power in our lives? When we face challenges, do we turn to Him, knowing He is the only one who can truly answer, or do we look elsewhere? Just as Israel was called to choose Yahweh over Baal, we too are called to make the same decision today. Who do we truly serve, and where do we place our trust? In the same way Yahweh proved His supremacy in Israel's history, He continues to challenge us to dedicate ourselves to Him alone. And just as Elijah stood firm in the face of overwhelming opposition, we are invited to stand firm in our faith, trusting that Yahweh will reveal His power when we remain loyal to Him. 3. The role of other gods in ancient Israel. In the ancient world, the spiritual landscape was much more complex than the singular, monotheistic faith we embrace today. For much of Israel's history, Yahweh was not seen as the only God. In fact, He was often recognized among a divine assembly, which included gods like Baal, Asherah, and even El, the head of the Canaanite pantheon. While the Bible consistently presents Yahweh as the supreme deity, it is also filled with references to these other gods, not just as idols, but as real entities that were worshipped and followed by Israel's neighbors, and even at times by the Israelites themselves. In Exodus 6:3, God reveals Himself to Moses, saying, "I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name the Lord I did not make myself known to them." This verse highlights the evolution of Israel's understanding of Yahweh. Initially, He was seen as a powerful deity, but not yet fully known in His uniqueness. The transition from a polytheistic society where gods were many to the eventual recognition of Yahweh as the only true God was gradual. Psalm 82 offers a striking vision of this ancient divine assembly, where Yahweh stands as the judge among the gods, confronting their failings. God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. This passage reveals that at one time, Yahweh was considered part of a divine council, a council where other gods existed. But Yahweh wasn't content to share this space forever. Over time, He began to assert His sovereignty, not by annihilating these gods, but by demonstrating His supreme authority and by gradually displacing them. The existence of these other gods in Israelite culture isn't just historical. It has deep theological implications. It shows that Israel's journey toward monotheism wasn't instant. They didn't just wake up one day and decide there was only one God. It took centuries, cultural interactions, and a progressive revelation of who Yahweh truly was. There were times when Yahweh's own people, Israel, worshipped these other gods alongside Him, seeking protection from Baal or fertility from Asherah. This syncretism, or blending of faiths, was condemned throughout the Scriptures, yet it also reflects the complexity of Israel's relationship with Yahweh. As we look at this history, it poses an important question for us today. Are there areas in our lives where we allow other gods to coexist with Yahweh? We might not have physical altars to Baal or Asherah in our homes, but we live in a world where countless distractions and idols compete for our devotion. From the pursuit of money to our obsession with success, there are countless things that can take Yahweh's rightful place in our hearts. What is our relationship with these gods in our lives? Do we allow them to coexist with our worship of Yahweh, Or are we willing to confront these distractions and idols head-on, as Yahweh did with the other gods of ancient Israel? Just as Israel's journey involved a process of purification and separation, our faith too requires ongoing refinement. It's not enough to simply acknowledge Yahweh as the supreme God. We must actively ensure that no other gods occupy his rightful place in our lives. This understanding of ancient Israel's spiritual landscape offers us insight into our own journey of faith. Just as Yahweh didn't destroy the other gods immediately but slowly consolidated his power, we too must allow God to work in our hearts, pushing out the competing influences and establishing his place as the one true God in our lives. The challenge is clear. Just as Yahweh gradually became the sole focus of Israel's worship, we are called to make him the sole focus of ours. 4. Monolatry versus monotheism. The shift from monolatry to monotheism is one of the most profound theological transitions in biblical history, and understanding it can dramatically change how we view the faith journey of ancient Israel and our own. Monolatry, the worship of one God among many, was practiced by the Israelites for centuries before they fully embraced monotheism, the belief in only one God. This transition wasn't sudden. It was a gradual evolution, marked by key theological developments that shaped the spiritual identity of Israel. The concept of monolatry is seen in numerous parts of the Bible, particularly in the early texts, where Yahweh is presented as the most powerful of the gods, but other gods are still recognized. Exodus 20:3, "You shall have no other gods before me," is a clear command from Yahweh demanding exclusive worship, yet it also implies the existence of other gods. If there were no other gods, there would be no need to issue such a command. This verse reveals that at one point the Israelites were in a phase of monolatry, recognizing the existence of other gods but choosing to worship Yahweh alone. But what changed over time? Why did Israel move from worshiping Yahweh among other gods to recognizing him as the one true God with no rivals? The answer lies in the spiritual and political context of the ancient world. The Israelites lived surrounded by polytheistic cultures like the Egyptians, Canaanites, and Babylonians, all of which had rich pantheons of gods. As Israel's identity began to form, Yahweh was acknowledged as the chief deity, but his supremacy was not fully recognized. In this environment, monolatry was a natural stage of spiritual development, a recognition of Yahweh as the chief God without denying the existence of others. However, as Israel faced crisis after crisis, particularly during the exile and the rise of the prophetic voices, Yahweh began to demand something more. In Isaiah 45:5, Yahweh declares, "I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God." This is a turning point. It marks the movement from monolatry to the absolute monotheism that we recognize today, Yahweh as the sole exclusive deity with no competition. The theological shift to monotheism didn't just happen overnight. It was a slow, deliberate process that occurred over centuries. The Israelite people, influenced by the theological reforms brought on by key figures like King Josiah, began to purge their land of idols, high places, and rival gods. It was through these reforms that Yahweh was consolidated as the only true God, with all other gods demoted to false or non-existent status. This transition to monotheism was more than a change in belief. It was a complete redefinition of Israel's relationship with Yahweh. No longer was he just a tribal deity, part of a larger pantheon. He became the God of the entire cosmos, the creator of all things, and the one true ruler over all. This was an essential shift in how Israel viewed their identity and purpose. No longer did they worship Yahweh as just the God of Israel. They now recognized him as the sovereign Lord over all creation. For us today, this journey from monolatry to monotheism mirrors our own faith journey. Many of us start with a shallow understanding of who God is. We might acknowledge him as powerful or good, but not yet fully recognize his sovereignty and exclusivity in our lives. Just as the Israelites slowly shifted from recognizing Yahweh as just one among many gods to recognizing him as the one true God, we too must undergo a transformation in our faith. How often do we let other gods in our lives compete for our devotion? Are there areas where we give our attention to idols, whether they be material possessions, success, or even our own desires, rather than focusing solely on Yahweh? Just as Israel's faith grew deeper and more exclusive over time, so too must our devotion to God. Monotheism, for the Israelites, wasn't just about doctrinal purity. It was about loyalty, exclusivity, and commitment to the one true God. As we examine this shift in Israel's history, it challenges us to reflect on our own spiritual journey. Are we still living in a state of monolatry, where we recognize God's power but allow other things to vie for our attention? Or have we fully embraced the call to monotheism, a wholehearted devotion to Yahweh as the only true God, with no room for rivals? The journey toward this kind of devotion is long and challenging, but it is the path that leads to deeper faith and a closer relationship with the Creator. Chapter 5. The Purge of Rival Deities. The theological war for Yahweh's exclusivity didn't stop at mere acknowledgement. It culminated in a decisive act, one that would redefine the spiritual landscape of Israel and set the stage for the monotheism we know today. This was a battle for Yahweh's singular identity, and it was fought through intense, purposeful purges of rival deities. The actions taken during the reign of King Josiah are some of the most dramatic in this process, marking the final defeat of any deities that could challenge Yahweh's supremacy. King Josiah's reform, found in passages like 2 Kings 23:4-6 and 2 Chronicles 34:3-7, represents a key turning point in the history of Israel's faith. Josiah, influenced by prophetic voices and a desire to return to Yahweh, initiated a radical purification of the nation's religious practices. In his zeal for restoring Yahweh's worship, he ordered the destruction of all altars, idols, and high places dedicated to other gods. He systematically eradicated any trace of pagan worship from the land of Judah, ensuring that nothing remained to compete with Yahweh's worship. Josiah's actions were not just political, they were deeply spiritual. The king wasn't simply trying to consolidate power, he was enforcing a divine command. Yahweh had long called for the rejection of idols, and Josiah's reforms acted as a decisive response to centuries of syncretism, where the worship of Yahweh had been mixed with the rituals of rival deities like Baal, Asherah, and Molech. This wasn't just about removing physical objects, it was about purging the heart of the nation from competing loyalties. The destruction of the Asherah poles is particularly significant. Asherah, once regarded as the consort of Yahweh in some Israelite circles, was seen as a symbol of fertility, life, and the earth itself. But in Josiah's reforms, the Asherah symbol was burned, crushed, and scattered, symbolizing the complete rejection of any divine partnership with Yahweh. It was a declaration that Yahweh needed no partner, no rival, no competition. He was to be worshipped alone. For us, the call to purge rival deities takes on a powerful meaning. While we may not be facing physical idols or temples today, the idea of idols, anything that competes for our love, attention, and worship, is still very relevant. In our world, these idols can take many forms: materialism, fame, success, relationships, or even our own pride. These are the modern counterparts to the pagan gods of ancient Israel. They are the things that try to take Yahweh's rightful place in our hearts. How often do we allow these idols to remain in our lives, unchallenged and unexamined? The Israelites were tempted by the fertility gods and the gods of war because they seemed to offer something Yahweh didn't. Baal, for example, was the god of storms and fertility, and worshipping him promised a bountiful harvest. But these were fleeting promises, idols that could never truly satisfy. Similarly, in our modern lives, we may seek fulfillment in success, wealth, or pleasure, only to find that these things ultimately leave us empty. Yahweh's call to exclusive worship doesn't just demand the removal of these distractions. It demands that we radically reorder our priorities. Just as King Josiah removed the altars and sacred symbols to other gods, we must confront the idols in our own hearts and purge them from our lives. The question is, are we willing to take action? Are we ready to dismantle the things in our lives that are taking precedence over our relationship with God? In practical terms, purging these rival deities might look like reprioritizing our time, energy, and resources to focus more on our relationship with God. It might involve letting go of unhealthy attachments to material wealth or status. It could even mean reassessing how we define success and what truly matters to us. Whatever the idol, the call is clear. Yahweh demands exclusive worship, not because he is a jealous God, but because he alone is worthy of our total devotion. So, as we reflect on Josiah's bold actions, we are invited to ask ourselves, what idols or distractions have we allowed to linger in our lives? How can we, like Josiah, take active steps to purify our hearts and lives, removing everything that competes with our worship of Yahweh? The challenge is before us. Just as Yahweh cleansed Israel, he calls us to cleanse our hearts and make him the center of our devotion. 6. The exile and the reinterpretation of Yahweh. The Babylonian exile is one of the most pivotal moments in Israel's history. It marked a profound shift in Israel's understanding of God, not just as their protector and ruler, but as the sovereign Lord of all creation. This was a time of deep despair for the Israelites, as they watched their beloved city of Jerusalem fall, the temple be destroyed, and their people scattered across foreign lands. In this period of exile, Yahweh's identity was put to the test, and a new theological understanding of his role in the world emerged. The exile was a time of great theological rethinking. Before the exile, Yahweh was primarily seen as the God of Israel, tied to a particular place, people, and temple. He was the God who had delivered them from Egypt, who had given them the promised land, and who had blessed their nation. But with the destruction of the temple and the capture of the people, the very foundation of their faith was shaken. How could Yahweh, the God of Israel, allow his chosen people to suffer such humiliation? This question was answered, in part, through the prophetic writings of the exile. Prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, especially in passages like Isaiah 45:18-23 and Jeremiah 29:10-14, began to proclaim a radical new vision of Yahweh. They declared that Yahweh was not just the God of Israel, but the creator and ruler of the entire universe. No longer was he confined to the temple or the boundaries of Israel. He was the God of all nations, the one who controlled the rise and fall of empires and who held the world in his hands. In Isaiah 45:18-23, we see the transformation of Yahweh's identity from a regional God to the sole sovereign of the universe. Yahweh declares, "I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God. I will strengthen you, though you have not acknowledged me." This statement redefines the very nature of God. He is not merely the protector of Israel. He is the ruler over all nations, sovereign over history, and present even in exile. For the Israelites, this was a revolutionary understanding. In the exile, they were forced to confront the idea that their God was not just their God in times of blessing and triumph, but also in times of suffering and defeat. Yahweh's power was not limited to their land or temple. Even in the darkest moments when it seemed as if he had abandoned them, he was still at work in the world, bringing about his purposes. This new understanding of Yahweh's sovereignty had profound implications for the faith of the Israelites. It meant that no matter where they were, whether in Babylon or beyond, their God was still with them. He was not a God confined to a place or a people. He was the creator of all things, and he was with them even in exile. This understanding of God's omnipresence gave the Israelites hope. They were no longer dependent on a physical location to experience God's presence. They could worship and trust in him no matter where they were. For us today, this understanding of Yahweh's sovereignty has powerful implications as well. It challenges us to expand our vision of God and to see him as the Lord of all, not just the God of our own lives, churches, or communities. God is not limited by geography, time, or circumstance. He reigns over the entire universe, and his sovereignty is not bound by the limitations we often place on him. In our own lives, we can find comfort in knowing that God is not confined to our specific situations. Even when things seem hopeless, when we face personal exiles or challenges, we can trust that God is still sovereign. He is still at work, still guiding history, and still involved in our lives. This understanding can deepen our faith and help us see God's hand at work even in the most difficult circumstances. The exile was a time of loss and tragedy, but it also marked a turning point in Israel's understanding of Yahweh. It forced them to rethink their theology and embrace a more expansive view of God's reign. As we reflect on this, we are invited to ask, how can we broaden our understanding of God's sovereignty? Are we limiting God by viewing Him as only relevant to certain areas of our lives, or can we trust in His power and presence in all circumstances, knowing that He is the Lord of all? 7. The final victory, Yahweh's exclusivity. As we look at the culmination of Yahweh's journey toward exclusive worship, we come to a profound realization. The struggle for Yahweh to become the sole object of worship was not just a historical event or a political shift, it was a deeply theological and spiritual transformation. By the time of the exile and the reforms that followed, Yahweh had fully established Himself as the one true God, and no other deity could rival His sovereignty. The Old Testament is filled with references to other gods, gods of the nations surrounding Israel, gods of fertility, war, and nature. But as the biblical narrative progresses, we begin to see a shift. By the time of the exile, Yahweh had not only become Israel's national God, but had also transcended regional boundaries. No longer was He just the God of Israel, He was the God of the entire universe. He was not to be worshipped alongside other gods, but was the sole deity, demanding exclusive devotion. One of the most striking ways this exclusivity is expressed is in the proclamations found in Isaiah 44:6, where Yahweh declares, "I am the first and I am the last. Apart from me, there is no God." This declaration encapsulates the essence of the theological transformation that had taken place. No longer would Yahweh share His throne with any other god. He alone was the eternal creator, and He alone would be worshipped. But Yahweh's victory was not just about being declared the supreme deity. It was about the complete eradication of any competition. Over the centuries, He had absorbed aspects of other gods' identities and roles, but now Yahweh was stamping out any rival worship altogether. In the reign of King Josiah, we see a decisive action that illustrates Yahweh's exclusivity. Josiah's religious reforms were not just about centralizing worship in Jerusalem. They were about purging Israel of every trace of idolatry and rival worship. The altars to foreign gods were destroyed, sacred poles to Asherah were burned, and the cults of Baal and Molech were eradicated. In 2 Kings 23:4-6 it is written, "The king ordered the high priest to remove from the temple of the Lord all the articles made for Baal and Asherah. He burned the chariots dedicated to the sun." This was not merely a political act of consolidation. It was a spiritual war, one in which Yahweh declared through His chosen king that all idols and foreign deities were to be completely removed. There was no room for anything or anyone to rival Yahweh's supremacy. This act of purging was not only symbolic. It was a spiritual battle for the hearts and minds of Israel. The people had lived with multiple gods for centuries, but now they were being called to make a decisive choice. Would they continue to worship the gods of their ancestors and neighbors, or would they pledge exclusive allegiance to Yahweh alone? For us today, Yahweh's victory over the other gods calls us to examine our own hearts. Are there areas of our lives where other gods, idols of success, wealth, comfort, or power, compete for our loyalty? Just as Yahweh demanded Israel's exclusive devotion, He calls us to live in a way that honors His sovereignty in every area of our lives. This exclusivity is not about being rigid or dogmatic. It is about recognizing that Yahweh is the only true source of fulfillment and hope. When we place anything else in His rightful place, we distort the worship and the relationship we are meant to have with Him. The final victory of Yahweh over the other gods marks a powerful shift in the history of Israel, and it shapes our understanding of Him today. It's a victory that invites us to walk with a renewed sense of His supreme authority in our lives. This victory, declared throughout the Old Testament, is a call to reflect on the ways we honor and worship Yahweh exclusively, knowing that He is the Creator, the King, and the only one worthy of our devotion. In a world filled with distractions and competing demands, this scene invites us to ask ourselves, how do we respond to Yahweh's exclusivity in our own faith journeys? Are we willing to eliminate the idols and distractions in our lives that threaten to take away from His place as the only true God? Just as Yahweh demanded purity in Israel's worship, He invites us to experience a deeper, more exclusive relationship with Him, rooted in the understanding that He alone reigns supreme. Conclusion. Yahweh's rise to exclusive sovereignty is not merely a historical or theological event. It is the foundational story of the people of Israel and, by extension, of our own faith journey today. What began as a complex and multi-deity environment, where Yahweh was just one among many gods, eventually culminated in the clear declaration that there is no God but Yahweh. This divine war for supremacy not only shaped Israel's history, but also established a framework for understanding God's sovereignty that transcends time and place. Throughout Scripture, we witness Yahweh's gradual ascension through battles, spiritual conflicts, and reformations, until He stands alone as the Creator of the heavens and the earth, demanding exclusive devotion from His people. His supremacy was asserted not through brute force alone, but through relationship, through His covenant with Israel, and through His ongoing revelation to humanity. In our own lives, this divine war calls us to examine where our hearts are invested. Do we place our trust and devotion in the only true God, or do we allow the gods of our modern world, success, wealth, comfort, or personal ambition, to rival His place in our hearts? Just as Israel's spiritual victory required the purging of rival worship, so too must we examine our own lives and remove the idols that threaten our relationship with Yahweh. The journey from monolatry to monotheism in the history of Israel serves as a powerful reminder that faith is a dynamic process, not a static set of beliefs. Yahweh's supremacy was not immediately accepted. It was fought for and gradually asserted, much like the way we mature in our faith. Just as Israel transitioned from recognizing multiple gods to recognizing Yahweh alone, we too can experience a journey of deepening devotion, where we move from being mere followers of God to wholehearted worshippers of Him alone. This process of spiritual growth challenges us today. It asks us, are we ready to acknowledge Yahweh as the only true God in every aspect of our lives? Are we willing to allow His exclusivity to shape our choices, relationships, and the very way we live? Just as Israel was called to abandon all other forms of worship, we too are called to root our lives in the unwavering devotion to Yahweh, the one true God. If this video has stirred something within you, share it with your friends and family so they too can reflect on Yahweh's journey to becoming the one true God. Let's engage in a conversation about the idols and distractions in our lives that compete for our devotion. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on the spiritual war for your heart and how we can live out Yahweh's exclusive sovereignty in our modern world. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content on faith, history, and scripture. Let's continue this journey of discovering the depth and richness of our faith together. How do you see the gods that compete for your devotion in your life? What steps are you taking to ensure that Yahweh alone sits at the throne of your heart? Share your experiences and reflections in the comments below. Let's explore this journey of faith together.